The story of Peg Entwistle begins like so many others drawn to early Hollywood, with ambition, talent, and the promise of something just out of reach. A trained stage actress who crossed the Atlantic chasing opportunity, she arrived in Los Angeles believing that success was only a roll away. But Hollywood in the early 1930s was a place of narrow chances and quiet rejections, where hope often lingered longer than opportunity. Peg Entwistle's name would not become famous for the career she dreamed of, but for a single tragic moment that came to symbolize the darker side of the dream factory itself. In September of 1932, a hiker made a discovery beneath the Hollywood sign that would become one of the most haunting stories in the history of Los Angeles. She found a woman's shoe, then a jacket, then a purse. Inside that purse was a suicide note with just 2 initials, P.E. When she looked down into the ravine below, she saw a body. The woman who had jumped from the letter H of the Hollywoodland sign was 24-year-old Peg Entwistle, a talented stage actress who had come to California chasing the same dream that had drawn thousands of others to the Golden Coast. But Peg's story didn't begin in Hollywood. It began across the ocean in a small Welsh town, and the path that led her to that sign on Mount Lee was filled with both triumph and heartbreak. Millicent Lillian Entwistle was born on February 5, 1908, in Port Talbot, Glamorgan, Wales. Her parents were Emily and Robert Symes Entwistle, and her father was an actor, which meant that performance and theater were woven into the fabric of her childhood from the very beginning. The family called her Peg, a nickname that would stick with her throughout her life. She spent her early years in West Kensington, London, and while many accounts claim that her mother died when Peg was very young, the truth appears to be more complicated and perhaps more painful. In December of 1922, Robert Entwistle wrote a will that revealed a difficult family situation. He specifically stated that Millicent Lillian Entwistle was the daughter of his first wife, whom he had divorced, and that custody had been awarded to him. Then he added something striking. He did not desire his daughter to be at any time in the custody or control of her mother. Whatever had happened between Peg's parents, it was serious enough that her father wanted to ensure she would never be placed with her mother, even after his death. The Entwistle family made their way to America, though the exact timing has been debated over the years. Some records suggest they sailed from Liverpool aboard the SS Philadelphia in 1916 and settled in New York City. But documents and photographs from the Entwistle family archives tell a different story. They show that Peg and her father were actually in Cincinnati, Ohio, and New York City as early as the spring of 1913. This is backed up by the Internet Broadway database and the New York Times, which list Robert S. Entwistle in the cast of several plays in 1913. So it seems the family had been in America for several years before the commonly cited date. For young Peg, this meant growing up in the vibrant, chaotic world of American theater during its golden age, watching her father work and absorbing everything she could about the craft of acting. Then, in December of 1922, tragedy struck. Robert Entwistle was killed by a hit-and-run driver at Park Avenue and 72nd Street in New York City. Peg was just 14 years old. She and her 2 younger half-brothers were suddenly orphaned, their father taken from them by a motorist who was never found. The 3 children were taken in by their uncle, who had come with them to New York and worked as the manager for Broadway actor Walter Hampton. This connection would prove crucial for Peg's future. Her uncle's position in the theater world meant she was still surrounded by actors, directors, and producers. She wasn't just near the theater, she was inside it, watching, learning, and preparing for her own moment in the spotlight. By 1925, when Peg was 17 years old, she was living in Boston as a student of Henry Jewett's repertory, which is now called the Huntington Theater. She was one of the Henry Jewett Players, a group that was gaining national attention for their work. Walter Hampton, her uncle's employer, gave Peg her first break, an uncredited walk-on part in his Broadway production of Hamlet, which starred the legendary Ethel Barrymore. Peg's role was small but memorable. She carried the king's train and brought in the poison cup. It was the kind of part that might seem insignificant, but for a young actress, it was everything. She was on a Broadway stage, in a major production, surrounded by professionals. She was learning by doing, and she was hungry for more. That same year, at just 17, Peg landed a role that would change her life and inspire another actress who would become a Hollywood legend. She played Hedvig in a 1925 production of Henrik Ibsen's The Wild Duck. In the audience one night was a young woman named Bette Davis, who was so moved by Peg's performance that she turned to her mother and said, "I want to be exactly like Peg Entwistle." Years later, when Broadway actress and director Blanche Yerka asked Davis if she would like to play Hedvig, Davis sent word back that ever since she had seen Entwistle in The Wild Duck, she had known she would someday play that role. Throughout her career, Bette Davis would say that Peg Entwistle was her inspiration to take up acting. Think about that for a moment. One of the greatest actresses in the history of cinema credited Peg Entwistle as the reason she became an actress. Peg had that kind of power on stage. She could move people, inspire them, make them believe in the reality of the character she was playing. By 1926, Peg had been recruited by the prestigious New York Theater Guild, one of the most respected theater companies in America. Her first credited Broadway performance came in June of that year, when she played Martha in The Man from Toronto at the Selwyn Theater. The show ran for 28 performances. It wasn't a massive hit, but it was a start, and more importantly, it was a credit with the Theater Guild. Between 1926 and 1932, Peg performed in 10 Broadway plays as a member of the Theater Guild. She worked alongside some of the biggest names in theater: George M. Cohan, William Gillette, Robert Cummings, Dorothy Gish, Hugh Sinclair, Henry Travers, and Laurette Taylor. These weren't small productions or minor players. Peg was working at the highest level of American theater, holding her own with actors whose names are still remembered today. Her longest-running play was Tommy in 1927, in which she starred with Sidney Toler. The show ran for 232 performances and became the production for which she was most remembered during her lifetime. 232 performances meant Peg was playing the same character night after night for months. She was a working actress, earning a living doing what she loved, and audiences were coming to see her. But not every show was a success. In September of 1927, a play called The Uninvited Guest closed after only 7 performances. It was a flop by any measure, but even in failure, Peg stood out. The New York Times critic J. Brooks Atkinson wrote, "Peg Entwistle gave a performance considerably better than the play warranted." That's the kind of review that keeps an actor going. It says, you're good even when everything around you isn't. Between Broadway productions, Peg went on tour with the Theater Guild, changing characters every week and performing in cities across the country. She garnered some publicity along the way, including an article in the Sunday edition of the New York Times in 1927 and another in the Oakland Tribune 2 years later. In that Oakland Tribune interview, Peg revealed something about herself that shows how seriously she took her craft. She was often cast as a comedian, playing the attractive, good-hearted ingenue, but that wasn't what she wanted. She told the reporter, "I would rather play roles that carry conviction. Maybe it is because they are the easiest and yet the hardest things for me to do. To play any kind of an emotional scene, I must work up to a certain pitch. If I reach this in my first word, the rest of the words and lines take care of themselves. But if I fail, I have to build up the balance of the speeches, and in doing this, the whole characterization falls flat. I feel that I am cheating myself. I don't know whether other actresses get this same reaction or not, but it does worry me." This wasn't someone who was just going through the motions. Peg was an artist who cared deeply about the truth of her performances. She wanted to play roles that mattered, roles that challenged her, roles that carried emotional weight. In April of 1927, Peg married actor Robert Keith at the chapel of the New York City Clerk's office. It should have been a happy beginning, but the marriage was troubled from the start. 2 years later, in May of 1929, Peg was granted a divorce. Along with charges of cruelty, she claimed that her husband had not told her he had been married before and was father to a 6-year-old boy named Brian Keith, who would later become an actor himself. Imagine discovering that your husband had hidden an entire previous marriage and a child from you. The betrayal must have been devastating. Peg was 21 years old, divorced, and trying to build a career in an industry that was notoriously difficult for women. But she kept working, she kept performing, she kept pushing forward. In early 1932, Peg made her last Broadway appearance in J.M. Barrie's Alice Sit by the Fire, which starred Lorette Taylor. But Taylor's alcoholism had become a serious problem. She missed 2 evening performances, and ticket holders had to be refunded. The show was canceled, and in the aftermath, Peg and the other actors were given only a week's salary instead of the percentage of the box office gross that had been agreed upon before the show opened. It was a financial blow at the worst possible time. The country was in the depths of the Great Depression. Jobs were scarce, money was tight, and the theater world was struggling along with everyone else. Peg needed work, and she needed it desperately. By May of 1932, Peg was in Los Angeles with a role in the Romney Brent play The Mad Hopes, starring Billy Burke. The production ran from May 23rd to June 4th at the Belasco Theater in downtown Los Angeles. Florence Lawrence, the theater critic for the Los Angeles Examiner, gave the production a very favorable review. She wrote that the production had been staged most effectively and endowed with every distinction of cast and direction. Then she singled out Peg specifically. In the cast, Peg Entwistle and Humphrey Bogart hold first place in supporting the star, and both give fine, serious performances. Miss Entwistle, as the earnest young daughter of a vague mother, presents a charming picture of youth. There it was again. Peg standing out, even when sharing the stage with someone like Humphrey Bogart, who would go on to become one of the biggest movie stars in the world. She was good. Everyone who saw her knew she was good. After The Mad Hopes closed, Peg won her first and only credited film role with Radio Pictures, which later became RKO. The film was called 13 Women, and it starred Myrna Loy and Irene Dunne in a pre-Hays Code, high-budget thriller produced by David O. Selznick. The film was drawn from a novel by Tiffany Thayer, and Peg played a small supporting role as Hazel Cousins. In the film, there's a very short scene where Hazel Cousins murders her husband with a knife. It wasn't a large part, but it was a film role, and film was where the future seemed to be. Theater was struggling during the Depression, but movies were still drawing audiences. If Peg could establish herself in pictures, she might have a real career ahead of her. She must have felt hopeful. She must have thought this could be the beginning of something new. But after filming Wrapped, there was nothing, no more offers, no callbacks, no next project. Peg was living with her uncle in the Beechwood Canyon area of Los Angeles, not far from the Hollywoodland sign that had been erected in 1923 as an advertisement for a real estate development. The sign was massive, with letters 50 feet tall, and it was visible from all over the city. It was a symbol of Hollywood itself. Bright, bold, impossible to ignore. But for Peg, it must have felt like a taunt. She was so close to the dream, living right beneath that sign, but the dream wasn't coming true. She was 24 years old, divorced, unemployed, and running out of options. The Depression meant there were fewer roles available, and competition was fierce. For every part, there were dozens of talented actresses desperate for work. On Friday, September 16, 1932, Peg told her uncle she was going for a walk to a drugstore and to see some friends. She never came back. 2 days later, on September 18th, a woman was hiking below the Hollywoodland sign when she found a woman's shoe, purse, and jacket. She opened the purse and found a suicide note. Then she looked down the mountain and saw the body below. The woman reported her findings to the Los Angeles police and laid the items on the steps of the Hollywood police station. Later that day, a detective and 2 radio car officers found the body in a ravine below the sign. Peg's death brought wide and often sensationalized publicity. The newspapers loved the story. A beautiful young actress, a suicide from the Hollywood sign, a note with mysterious initials. It had all the elements of a tragic Hollywood tale. Her funeral was held at the W.M. Strathers Mortuary in Hollywood on September 20th. Her body was cremated, and the ashes were later sent to Glendale, Ohio, for burial next to her father in Oak Hill Cemetery, where they were interred on January 5th, 1933. Peg was laid to rest beside the father she had lost 10 years earlier, the man who had brought her to America and introduced her to the world of theater. And then, just weeks after her death, 13 Women premiered on October 14, 1932, at the Roxy Theater in New York City. It was released in Los Angeles on November 11th. Peg never got to see herself on screen. She never got to attend the premiere or read the reviews or see her name in the credits. The film was not a critical or commercial success. By the time it was re-released in 1935, 14 minutes had been cut from the original 73-minute running length. But in 2008, Variety magazine cited 13 Women as one of the earliest female ensemble films, giving it a place in cinema history. Peg's only film role, the one she had hoped would launch her movie career, became a footnote in film history, remembered more for her tragic death than for her performance. Over the decades, Peg Entwistle's story has been remembered and retold in various ways. In 1972, Dory Previn sang about her in the song Mary C. Brown and the Hollywood Sign. In 1995, Jacko Jakschik's song Damn This Town mentioned Peg and her suicide. The 1997 film Stand-Ins begins with her suicide and ends with reference to the news article about her death. In 2014, Crazy House Theater Productions created and staged a musical called Goodnight September, loosely based on Peg's life and its impact on one family 70 years later. In 2015, French songwriter Benoit Clerc composed Peg est mon nom, a ballad that imagines Peg standing atop the big white letter H, wondering whether she will be remembered after her death. In 2017, actress Laura Liguori portrayed Peg in the short film Hollywood Girl, The Peg Entwistle Story. Lana Del Rey referenced Peg's suicide in her song Lust for Life, with lyrics about climbing up the H of the Hollywood sign, and in the music video, Del Rey and The Weeknd are seen dancing atop the H. In 2020, Ryan Murphy's miniseries Hollywood revolved around the fictional production of a film called Peg, about her acting career and suicide. That same year, the band Protest the Hero released a song called Gardenias that references Peg's death as a symbol for the struggle of making it in Hollywood. And in 2021, a new mural depicting Peg appeared in her hometown of Port Talbot, Wales. In 2014, roughly 100 people marked the anniversary of Peg's death by gathering in the parking lot of Beechwood Market in Hollywood to watch 13 Women on an outdoor screen. Proceeds from a raffle and from food and beverages sold at the screening were donated to the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention in Peg's name. It was a beautiful gesture, a way of turning her tragedy into something that might help others who are struggling. Because that's the thing about Peg's story that we can't forget. She was struggling and she felt like she had nowhere to turn. She felt like a failure, even though she had accomplished so much. She had performed on Broadway for years. She had worked with legendary actors. She had inspired Bette Davis, for crying out loud. But in that moment, in September of 1932, none of that felt like enough. She couldn't see a way forward. She couldn't see that things might get better. She couldn't see that she mattered. And that's what makes her story so important to remember, not as a piece of Hollywood gossip or a spooky tale about a haunted sign, but as a reminder of how fragile we all are, how much we need each other, and how important it is to reach out when we're struggling. Peg Entwistle was talented, beautiful, hardworking, and loved by the people who knew her. But she was also in pain, and that pain became too much to bear. If she had been able to hold on just a little longer, who knows what might have happened? Maybe she would have gotten another role. Maybe she would have become a star. Maybe she would have found happiness in some other way. We'll never know, because she's gone, and all we have left are the stories, the photographs, the single film, and the memory of a young woman who climbed to the top of a letter and let go. So when we think about Peg Entwistle, let's remember her not just for how she died, but for how she lived. Let's remember the 17-year-old girl who moved Betty Davis to tears. Let's remember the actress who gave performances considerably better than the plays warranted. Let's remember the woman who told a reporter that she wanted to play roles that carried conviction, roles that mattered. Let's remember that she was a real person with dreams and fears and hopes, just like all of us. And let's remember that if you're struggling, if you feel like you're at the end of your rope, there are people who care about you and want to help. Reach out, talk to someone, hold on, because your story doesn't have to end the way Peg's did. You matter. Your life has value, and the world needs you in it. That's all for today. Don't forget to subscribe and be kind to each other.